We've spent a few days talking about King Xerxes here, and we're going to spend a lot more time talking about Xerxes as we're into the book of Esther and as everything is unfolding here. I think Xerxes is a super interesting character, in part because of just the role he plays in the book of Esther. He is the linchpin character. All of the decision-making power flows through him. He's the king of land. He's the king of kings. Everybody's given him the gift of earth and water. And so he alone is positioned to make a massively fateful decision that will determine the outcome of the whole redemptive plan of everything. It's a gigantic burden that he bears, yet in the story, it doesn't even look like he really totally understands what he's dealing with or what he's toying with here. But as we look at the book of Esther, and as we look at stuff outside the book of Esther, we discover that the guy who's going to be responsible for making this decision has a goofy decision-making matrix. He just does stuff. He feels things. He's manipulatable. He's got vulnerabilities and insecurities that are exploitable by clever people around him. And even though he's the central decision maker of the story and it all hinges on him, it looks like pretty much everybody else in the story is actually a little more clever than him, and everybody's working him over as it goes along. So if you want to understand, say, in my country, how the Supreme Court might rule on a hypothetical case that could one day make it to the Supreme Court, you do a study, an in-depth study of all of the 9 justices and who appointed them and where they're from and how have they ruled in the past, and heck, maybe even you think about what's going on in their lives and what's their own personal narrative. And one who studies or speculates about such things as constitutional law and the Supreme Court could look at all of that stuff to try to develop a sense of how they imagine those justices might behave under a certain set of pressures introduced by a certain hypothetical case. In a sense, we're doing the same thing here with Xerxes. We're able to see him in color in a way that we haven't been able to see any of the extra biblical characters who get mentioned in the Bible so far. I think Xerxes probably is the character in the Old Testament who we know the most about from outside the Bible, and especially who we know the most about in a very up close and personal way. And we get a really personal look at him in the book of Esther as well. This guy's the third in a line of, you could make the case, 4 or 5 great kings in a row that made this era of Persia what it was. He's obviously highly competent and obviously inherited a very difficult situation. And so we get a mixed bag. He's relatable. He has problems and weaknesses, but also he has potential and he's capable of getting things done. And I imagine that's probably how you feel about yourself a little bit too. So I like the guy. And today we get to the thing he is best known for. Well, I don't know. Maybe he's best known for the book of Esther. I don't think so. All right, I'm going to say he's best known for his role in the book of Esther, but I'm going to say he's second best known for his failed campaign to go and conquer the Greeks, the Western Greeks in Athens and Sparta, and punish them in 480 BC. So we're talking about 6 years into his reign. Darius died in the fall of 486. And in 480, Xerxes gathers this incredible force, and I would love to just read you a bunch of the excerpts from Herodotus here in Book 7 about this. It's so good. It's so lively. There's so much inside the head of the characters involved on the Persian and on the Greek side, but I'll just invite you to go and read it. The full text of that is available online. Book 7 of Herodotus is where we get the stuff that we're talking about today. And Xerxes loads up this cosmopolitan, global, melting pot army, and they're all dressed in their own ways, and they all use their own weapons, and effectively, he's declared a world war against the Greeks. And Herodotus has him trying to cross the Hellespont. It's a little stretch of water between Asia Minor and the European continent, and he floats some pontoon bridges out there, but The weather gets the best of those, and so then Xerxes has the water whipped because he is the king of lands, and he's received the gift of earth and water, and this water should cooperate with him. And on the second attempt, it works, and he's able to move his army over these floating pontoons that make up this bridge into Europe, and then he starts to make his way around the Greek mainland and down along the western side of the Aegean Sea, working his way with naval support down toward Athens. Now, Athens and Sparta are going to be the two big players in putting up the resistance. In Sparta, you've usually got co-kings. It's kind of an odd setup. You've got a warrior cult there. You would not want to live in Sparta. They had a reputation for being the best warriors in the world, and indeed, at this point in history, they probably were, but that came at great cultural expense. But I will say this, culture aside, it's really nice to have Sparta in your corner when the king of kings, the king of lands, is invading your territory to punish you. Sparta refuses to offer the gift of earth and water to Xerxes, and instead, they go and lead a delaying tactic at this place called the Hot Gates. It's called Thermopylae. And it was this place that in the ancient topography, it's not this way anymore, you had this narrow little gap that you could only basically go through with a cart or two at a time. And Leonidas and the Spartans, along with support from several hundred others, decided that that's where they were going to set up shop and prevent the Persians from marching down the coast uninterrupted toward Athens. So you got Leonidas and the Spartans marching out and securing territory at the Hot Gates to delay and oppose Xerxes there. Meanwhile, back in Athens, you have the general, one who was present at the Battle of Marathon and one who has gone on to have a robust political career in Athens, a guy named Themistocles. Themistocles has been arguing forever that the Persians are going to come back, and when they come back, we're going to need a fleet in order to defeat them. And Athens is not a terribly defensible city at this point in history. And it looks like Themistocles believes that the flexibility provided by a fleet is what's going to give them a fighting chance against this Persian invasion. So as it becomes clear that Xerxes' numbers are unmatchable on land, Leonidas and the Spartans set up shop. They use that hoplite phalanx formation that we've talked about before with overlapping shields and spears. And for a long weekend, they hold out against Xerxes, refusing to bend the knee. And all during this time, Athens has already agreed upon a strategy to effectively abandon the city, let it get taken, let it get burned. But the thinking is that Xerxes and the Persians will not be able to really truly hold it unless they can pin down the Greek fleet, because otherwise that Greek fleet will be able to just shuttle around troops and even civilians and just wait out the Persians, who are already super delayed in this march. And Persia, the thinking is they won't be able to press this fight past September into October. They've got to get all the way back over land as winter is coming on, and it's very expensive to move an army that big. So the Greeks are trying to win, but they're also trying to win slow. And when Xerxes' approach strategy becomes clear, the Athenians do abandon the city. They occupy an island and a little bay right nearby. And in the process of all of this, Leonidas gets sold out by a Greek who shows the Persians a goat trail that enables them to get in behind the Greeks and defeat their formation, but not after the brave Spartans inflicted all kinds of injury and damage, and most importantly, delay on the Persians. Every day counts. Every day that Xerxes is delayed, he's going to have to behave with more tactical desperation in order to try to earn back those days that still remain of fall to finish out his campaign and achieve all of his objectives. Xerxes has Leonidas' body cut in half and put on either side of the Hot Gates as his army marches through. They do go and sack Athens, and now all that's left is to figure out how to eradicate that pesky fleet that's just right out there in the bay. You can see him from Athens. What are we going to do about that? Well, the Persians have a whole bunch of ships as well. But the question remains, how do you decide where and when to meet in battle? The Athenians know this water, and are comfortable with a delay here. It is to their benefit. Well, ultimately, through a whole bunch of very shrewd counterintelligence, Themistocles is able to manipulate Xerxes into an ill-advised engagement in the Straits of Salamis, right there next to Athens. And Xerxes, according to the story, sets up shop on a hill to watch his glorious victory, to finish out what Dad started and punish those Greeks. But what he sees instead is horrifying for the Persian cause. Themistocles has entirely outfoxed the Persians. It looks as though the Greek sailors and marines are more disciplined and better at what they do. And this global cosmopolitan fleet gradually falls apart and sinks into the bay before Xerxes' eyes. And after this crushing defeat, Xerxes is forced, for a whole bunch of reasons, to pack up and head for home. But the Persians don't entirely leave. Xerxes leaves behind Mardonius to hopefully just clean up the mess. Just mop up here. This is basically a victory for us. We'll just finish him off. Well, that does not happen. And shortly thereafter, the Greeks win a decisive historical division-defining battle against the Persians, and they never try to come west again onto the Greek mainland after that. Now, if you're the Greeks, you got Marathon, you got Thermopylae, which is kind of a remember the Alamo situation, even though it wasn't a victory. It's still, in your hearts, it's a victory. And then you've got Salamis, which is a clear sweeping victory. And now you've got Plataea, that other victory against Mardonius I just referenced, to kind of finalize things. You've got a whole legacy built out of this stuff. And from this moment forward, Greece moves into a place where Athens kind of becomes the new Persia. They become the new bullies. And they just go back to fighting with each other, while Persia from here on out stays back to the east on the Asian continent. And the Athenians pivot out of this mindset of global war and into a mindset of local war and the golden age of Athenian philosophy. Xerxes, on the other hand, is got to be embarrassed, but at the same time, as a consolation prize, if you're Xerxes, you still get all of the rest of planet Earth, which is pretty good. I mean, he didn't lose any territory in any of this. He just failed to conquer more territory and settle an old score. And maybe if you're Xerxes, you can look at it and be like, you kidding me? The Spartans were the first one to spit in our faces, and I cut their supposedly valiant leader in half and stuck him on a couple of poles. I routed the Spartans. They could not withstand the might of Persia, and I burned Athens. I think I made my point. We don't need to occupy Greece. I'm fine here. Maybe that's how Xerxes perceived it. It's not a loss at all. We won. Maybe Xerxes perceived it as an absolutely crushing, humiliating defeat. If there's that much ambiguity for us looking back on it now, you have to imagine that in the dark hallways and corners of the royal courts in Susa and Persepolis and Babylon, that there was a lot of muttering about this as an embarrassment and as a defeat, no matter how Xerxes might have tried to frame it. This whole Greek campaign happens right in the middle of the book of Esther once again. Those pressures and those insecurities that we've talked about that this character is under, certainly this giant one is sitting there casting a long shadow over his decision-making in the whole story, and that'll come up in a lot more detail as we get into the book of Esther itself. I don't know how long our next episode is going to be, but I know what I'm going to do in it. And that is, I'm going to go back and look at a whole bunch of these things that we've learned about the kings of Persia and the circumstances in Persia and the circumstances of the Jews and the mindset of where all these different players are at. And we're going to distill it down to the facts, to the details, to the important contextual elements that are going to inform the story of Esther. And I will say that for me, the journey of doing history and literary analysis like this is the fun of it, but also it can be kind of fun to get to the part where you get the payoff. And next time around, we're going to get to the part where you get the payoff. Okay, I'm going on too long. I love that we get to do this together. Can't wait for more. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.